Hello, my friends. My name is Darren Gerdes. It is Tuesday, June 11th, 2024. Here is the daily brief for today. So 1,100 Russians are off the battlefield. Now, in perspective, what that means is this is higher than the daily average throughout the course of the war, which was 800 and change off the battlefield, which is pretty significant when you think about that. And then it is lower than the daily average for the last month or so, which has been hovering around 1,200, sometimes 13, 14, 15. I saw as high as 1,700 in one day. 23 tanks off the battlefield. Remember, replacement value is 3 to 4 tanks per day, so this was a good day for the Ukrainians. 32 armored combat vehicles, 46 artillery pieces, 58 vehicles and fuel tanks. But the one point that I want to show you is another aircraft is off the battlefield, and I'll explain. There's actually two, but the second one you can't really account for on this chart, and I'll explain why. So when we look at Andrew Perpetua's list of what has been damaged, what it can account for visually, about 2 to 1 Russian to Ukrainian losses. I like to see 3 to 1 because this is to some degree attritional warfare. I know some people will disagree with me, but to some degree Ukraine really can't lose as much as what Russia loses and keep parity. So I'd like to see 3 to 1, but still not a bad day. Okay. Start your morning with great news. Ukraine warriors shot down a Russian SU-25 jet. So they shot this one down. And then, not to be outdone, the Russians then crashed one of their own military jets, a Su-34. The aircraft went down during a scheduled training flight. Preliminary cause of the crash was a technical malfunction, but that's still another Su-34 off the battlefield that could have been used for damage and destruction. 1.5 million tons of oil was destroyed by Ukraine on June 5th. That's 6 days ago. 6 days ago. $540 million worth of oil went up in smoke. Now, while I'm not excited about the environmental damage that that's causing or the destruction of value or anything along those lines, it's $540 million worth of value that the Russians can't actually do something with in order to prosecute the war. And it wouldn't necessarily have gone, but you have to displace that with something else. So this is why the tax rates are going up, and it was like north of $2 billion that the increased tax rates are supposed to be generating from the Russian population, and they're not going to be happy about that, and that's a net positive for Ukraine. Okay. Zelensky's army of drones gets its own commander. I think this is a healthy move. This was something that happened back in February. The commander of the drone forces was a newly created post. The former commander was already a deputy, or the new commander is already a deputy commander of the armed forces with responsibility for drones. And Zelensky decreed in February a creation of a separate branch of the armed forces devoted to drones. I think this is like equivalent to the U.S. creating Space Force out of the Air Force, or the Air Force out of the Army Air Corps. It's the same kind of principle. And drone warfare is just so significant. I mean, both of my sons and I were in a civil air patrol, and my sons have gone through drone classes, and they're very focused on this kind of thing. This is the wave of the future. It's as much the wave of the future as tanks were at the end of World War I, and you could see what tanks did in World War II. Until drones are technically able to be neutralized, this has changed the battlefield in significant ways. Okay, Russia likely expanding recruitment across global south to sustain the war in Ukraine. I talked about this at some length yesterday. Here's another article. Russia's significantly increasing recruitment efforts in Africa to support its military operations in Ukraine. Well, that sounds very strange. Why in Africa? Because they're not Russian citizens. They're paid mercenaries. And if you have to draft Russians, they get upset, and then you have a political problem. But if you use mercenaries, you can just pay them and then send them into the meat grinder. Rwanda, Burundi, Congo, Uganda, they're going to all these countries to enlist fighters for the Russian side. Okay, as it turns out, the airfield in Russia's region where the state-of-the-art Su-57, that's the next gen, that's the equivalent, the Russians' answer to the American Raptor, fighters were hit, was protected from Ukrainian drones by a unique air defense system, one rifle per plane. Russian Z blogger reports. He also confirmed that 2 Su-57 aircraft were hit, but the second one was only superficially damaged and could be repaired very easily. The only response, this blogger said, to the drones was a squad that shot 2 magazines at them and then spent the whole morning collecting shell casings around the airfield. That's it. Like, okay, so what does that tell you then? If deeper inside Russia, there's no protection at all, even though they know that they're in a state of warfare, that means that they're pushing everything that they have up to the front, or almost everything that they have, or so much of it that they didn't even think that this was an important thing. The U.S. lifts a weapons ban on Ukraine's Azov brigade. Okay, the U.S. State Department lifts the ban on military aid to Ukraine's Azov brigade, previously barred due to neo-Nazi allegations after finding no evidence of human rights violations. Now, those neo-Nazi allegations go back to like 2014, 2015, something back 2016, something in that neighborhood as far as when those allegations were made, and the U.S. government said, nope, we're not supplying anything to them because they might have these kind of proclivities. But they've been cleared. The Azov Brigade, recognized for its determined yet ultimately unsuccessful defense of the Azov steel mill in Mariupol, is considered a highly effective combat unit. Over 900 are still in captivity as of early May this year. Back in 2015, the U.S. House, the U.S. House passed an amendment barring Azov from using U.S. arms based solely on media reports that were labeling Azov as neo-Nazi and fascist. Okay, so it was, but they went and checked it now, and they went, okay, well, what have they done? The image of the Nazi unit was amplified internationally by Russian propaganda outlets and was even used by Russia to justify its full-scale invasion of Ukraine by the claims that Ukraine allegedly needs to be denazified. Okay, so the media narrative was being twisted in that way. Now absorbed into the Ukrainian National Guard as a formal unit since 2015, the brigade, originally a volunteer militia, will have access to the same U.S. military assistance as any other unit. But it's really interesting because you wonder what they would have been able to do otherwise if they had not been barred in this way, based on media reports rather than actual investigation. After a thorough review, Ukraine's 12th Special Forces Azov Brigade passed Leahy vetting. Now, we'll talk about what Leahy vetting is in just a moment, as carried out by the U.S. Department of State. The agency said in a statement referring to the Leahy law that prevents U.S. military assistance from going to foreign units credibly found to have committed major human rights violations, the State Department found no evidence of such violations. So it's kind of an open question to how much better equipped the Azov battalion might have been had they not had that based on these media reports. Okay, the opening ceremony in Berlin, President Zelensky, now he's at a Ukraine recovery conference right now. At the opening ceremony, President Zelensky outlined plans to restore all energy facilities before winter. Okay. Energy has been vastly destroyed, about half of it, and he's going to be talking about this in this article here. And winter's coming, and winter will be here before you know it. I know it sounds weird as we're talking about this in June, but when winter comes, it's going to be hard. Winter there is something like what it feels like in the very top of the American, the states that are rimming Canada and into Canada. That's what the weather feels like. So they really need to get this sorted out. He noted that the Russian Federation had destroyed 9 gigawatts of Ukraine's energy capacity, despite last year's winter peak consumption at 18 gigawatts. Okay, so about half of it's been destroyed. He highlighted the urgent need for at least 7 Patriot air defense systems to bolster Ukraine's defenses, and said that Putin would not pursue an honest peace until Russia is prevented from terrorizing Ukraine. I think that's very fair. Until Putin doesn't feel like he's got the upper hand, he's not going to sue for peace at all. Here, while that's going on, the director of Russian Federal Security Services, Bortnikov, said that the agency has established the involvement of Ukrainian and Western military intelligence in the terrorist attack at Crocus City Hall. So he's actually saying that, see, we have evidence now that Ukraine was involved in this attack, where I don't believe that that's the case, but he didn't give any proof or details. And nobody's going to see any proof or details. Okay. Meanwhile, F-16 fighters and their airfields outside of Ukraine will become, according to the Russians, a legal target for Russian armed forces if they participate in combat missions, said the head of the State Duma Defense Committee, Andrei Kartapolov. Okay, so I can't think of a worse scenario that could be more that could more likely lead to involvement of NATO in a war with Russia than going after F-16s that are parked in Poland or some other NATO country. Now, so the thinking is that the reserve planes would be parked there until they're pulled forward and used. Whether they would go back after a mission or not, I don't know that that's the case, but he's saying, like, so clearly what he's saying is we don't want them to be able to do that. Right? But that would be a very, very dangerous policy for Russia if they don't want to involve themselves in a World War III type of scenario. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene trying to bring herself back into the picture again. From the very beginning, I have never voted for a single penny for Ukraine. Zelensky's thug regime has deemed me an enemy of the state. Not true, and we'll show you what that means in just a moment. And for a good reason. Zelensky has never had one single American vote for him. Not only am I Ukrainian enemy of the state, but I'm banned from Russia. Zelensky is a thug who doesn't deserve a single American tax dollar. All they care about is taking our money and our weapons. They put elected members of Congress like me on their state's kill list, all capital letters. Is it really? Zelensky is the real enemy of democracy. He has canceled election, canceled freedom of speech, canceled freedom of religion, canceled freedom of the press. Okay, canceled election? No, he can't have an election because of the Constitution bars him from doing that during martial law. Canceled freedom of speech? No, there is martial law, and martial law does tamp things down, and that's a legitimate part of how martial law works. Canceled freedom of religion? Well, she's talking about the Russian Orthodox Church that was being used as a conduit to separate Ukrainians from their children, being used to spread Russian propaganda into Ukraine. So there's a reason for that. So, and freedom of the press, same kind of thing with martial law. Okay, and so she shows this as some kind of evidence. Well, here's a Newsweek article talking about what it actually is. Marjorie Taylor Greene, an enemy of the state in Ukraine. Here's what we know. And so when you go down into this article, you see that same thing that she posted, and then we'll talk about what's going on. When asked about the list and whether it was funded or sponsored by the Ukrainian government, and a Ukrainian official told Newsweek no such list exists. New list that has been posted online, however, was compiled by a group of independent Ukrainian data journalists on a website called Tax-Deductible. On June 6, Tax-Deductible released a report titled Roller Coaster From Trumpists to Communists, the Forces in the U.S. Impeding Aid to Ukraine and How They Do It. Nowhere is the post branded a kill list. That's not what it's about. I looked at it. The report has 4 authors who contributed to the project, said to have been funded exclusively by site readers and aimed to discover inconsistencies in how U.S. politicians have approached the ongoing war and in some cases flip-flop back and forth in terms of pro-Ukraine sentiment, including approving aid. The list within the report includes 338 individuals, 76 organizations, ranging from politicians to political movements and groups, media, journalists, experts, and think tanks. The study analyzed several thousand pieces of content mentioning the war in Ukraine. Greene is joined on that list by Republicans like J.D. Vance, Rand Paul, Matt Gaetz, and Jim Jordan. Rand Paul's the outlier here. He's a libertarian who's never seen a war that he liked ever, and so he's not against Ukraine, but J.D. Vance is all on MAGA, so is Matt Gaetz, and Jim Jordan seems to have been very much like that as well. Here's the actual report, and if you'd like me to do an entire video just on this, we can go over it. And so here is Marjorie Taylor Greene, and there's a shot group of like, here's Donald Trump, and here are different organizations, RT and the Gray Zone and Fox and MAGA. And then when you look at it, you see people like Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene and others, Charlie Kirk and others that are Matt Gaetz, that are spreading this message. But she's not on some kill list. That's just nonsense. Okay, last couple of things. Traveling in style, Andrew Perpetua, who does the identifying of destroyed vehicles, whether they're Russian or Ukrainian. Russians have been traveling into battle on motorcycles. That's a very bad plan. No protection. They get blown up very quickly. So now they have drone cages over these motorcycles, and it looks awful. And it doesn't always work out so well. Uh-oh. Okay, last thing, my friends, a fun story. Russian propaganda TV host Mardan claimed Russia is a military empire. It always expends and subjugates her neighbors, adding that China should be subjugated like other neighbors. He did not think that the Chinese listened, translated, and published this in China. Oops. Okay, that's all that I have. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes. Thank you to my patrons and my members. Patrons, if you are of the board member level, we need to do our Zoom meeting. The tentative schedule is Saturday. We got to make sure that that's a good time. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.